this would be a good time to start the recording, Dean.
It's on.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. I'll remind everybody once again in a few minutes about pollev.com. But before I really start, there's some announcements to make. Those of you who have been here for all 3 webinars, you will have seen these before. This is a 60-minute session. If you have a question during the session, there's a question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen in the toolbar. Please use that to ask questions. I will answer the questions at the end of this session. I'd rather not get bogged down. I want to finish what I have to say, and then we'll answer the questions. If you have any technical problems or something that's not a question, Dean, he's here, and he's going to be moderating the chat. So go ahead and use that for technical problems. If there's any unanswered questions, please email me at the end of the session. My email address will be shown on the screen. Or if you'd like the slide deck, that's not normally provided, the slide deck, but if you want a slide deck, email me and I'll send you a slide deck. This session is being recorded, I think. I don't see anywhere where it says it is, but yes, it is. It's being recorded, and we're going to post it on HPRCT's YouTube channel several days after this session. This is the 3rd webinar of our first webinar week, and we hope to do something like this each month. So if you're interested in presenting a webinar, let us know. Let either myself or Bob Latino or Joe Este or anybody else on the board, let us know. I'd like to thank Bob especially for starting us off on Monday. That's Bob up there on the left. I mean, he was our groundbreaker with our debugger. We had audio problems. His air conditioning system wasn't working, and he lives in Richmond, Virginia, so it was probably 95 degrees in there when he was giving his webinar. And I'd like to thank him for giving us his initial impressions of HPRCT. And then he shared some things about root cause analysis that hopefully broadened your understanding of it. And then on Wednesday, Joe Este, the guy on the right, he helped us take a deep dive into human error, and he gave us a lot to think about in terms of how to handle it. So thanks, guys, for setting this up for me today. So today we're going to talk about this: no blame, required introspection, the pathway to true accountability. Now, one more time before I start, I want to mention that we're going to use pollev.com on your smartphone. So, I mean, if you have a smartphone or another device, get it out or open another window and type in pollev.com. And then type in the username C.Robert.Nelms 464. So let's try this. Let's see if it works. If this doesn't work, all I can say is, uh-oh. So here's my first question. Did you attend either Bob Latino's or Joe Este's webinar this week? Boy, this thing works marvelously, doesn't it? The only thing that it doesn't give me, probably my fault, is the actual count. But 75% of you saw either one or the other. 26% were not there for either. Okay, thank you for that. Keep those smartphones out. I want to ask you something else. I want to know who I'm talking to this hour. So if the person who knows you the best described you with one word, what would it be? And watch your language. Interesting, isn't it? while they're typing in there. This is pollev.com. Type it into your smartphones, pollev.com, and then the username is CRobertNelms464. Perfectionist, funny, thorough, meticulous, nice. But look at this. The two biggest words, the ones that are used the most, is curious and passionate. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Two more before we really start. Now, this is an interesting one because all you need to do is touch the screen. So if you have a smartphone, you can actually expand it so you can see more detail. Touch the screen wherever you live. Interesting, huh? There's Amit. I see Amit. I see somebody from Africa somewhere. I see the UK. I'm embarrassed to say I don't even know where that is. That's all the way down there. And that's embarrassing, isn't it? Oh, they just erased it. Somebody lives right in the middle of the ocean. Somebody lives down there in the Antarctica. No, I don't think so. But thank you very much for that. This is working very well. The last one I want to ask you before we really get into this is more relevant. What area covered by HPRCT, in your opinion, is in most need of improvement at your site? Thank you. Isn't that interesting? Now, I'll be sharing this with other people, that's for sure. Thank you very much for that. By the way, a recording of this will be made available after this session is over for those of you who want to see that. Okay, so let's get into this. No blame, required introspection, the pathway to true accountability. This is what we're going to talk about today. First, I want to say a little bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from. Then I'd like to talk about the event that changed everything for me, and it really did. And then the conclusions that I have drawn from that event. And then the big bolded letters up there. This is what I want to dwell on in this talk. 2 questions to ask after something goes wrong that could change just about everything. And you know, when I read that, I can't help but remember several years ago, I gave a 4-day class. It was a latent cause analysis class to a power company. And a director was present in that class just to kick it off. You know, he wanted to show his presence. He wanted to show support for the class. And he was going to spend, you know, a couple hours in the class and then leave, again, just to show his support. But he ended up spending 4 days in that class because he was so interested in what he heard during that first hour, which is, by the way, what you're going to hear right here, especially these 2 questions. I mean, that guy grabbed hold of these 2 questions and he made it part of him. I saw him last year at the HPRCT in Colorado Springs, and now he's a VP. And every time I see him, and there's people on this call who know who I'm talking about, every time I see him, he reminds me of how important those were and are to his life and his company. So I'm going to talk about those 2 questions, and then I'm going to talk about a policy-type statement that would help people embrace these 2 questions. And then we'll wrap up. So, a little bit about me and my path. Okay, well, look, we're all on a different path. My path is no better or worse than any of yours. It's just a different path. I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's of course, that's Amish country. I have Pennsylvania Dutch roots. I'm not Amish myself, but my mother, her last name was Joost. She lived in New Holland. She married my father, who was from Voganville. Probably nobody has ever heard of Voganville. So I was there 3 years, but my wife and I go back every year for 2 or 3 weeks because we love that area of the country. By the way, Dean Smith, who is on this call, and he's the technical moderator, he's not from there, but he's from close to there. But when I was 3 years old, my father moved us to Teaneck, New Jersey. Now, that's right across the river from New York City. That's the Hudson River you're looking at right there, and the George Washington Bridge. And if you go up there to the right, about 30 or 45 miles, that's West Point. If you go to the left, a mile or two, maybe 3 miles, that's the Statue of Liberty. New York is to the right. Teaneck, New Jersey is right about there. I married my wife, who was from Leonia, which is an adjacent town. And I went to Teaneck High School. It's called the Castle on the Hill. I was a nerd. I mean, I really was. I was a nerd. I was in the Boy Scouts all the way through high school. I really latched on to the Boy Scouts. Once a year, we had to wear our uniforms. Imagine this now, a Boy Scout uniform in high school. I wore it in my senior year of high school. I was committed to the Boy Scouts. Of course, that went over like a ton of bricks with most people. I was in the band. I was a band nerd. I played the saxophone. I was in the dance band, the jazz band, the marching band, the concert band. But I graduated, of course, and I went to school in Texas. And a lot of you people on here know this. I'm an Aggie. There's other Aggies that are listening in right now. I'm very proud to be an Aggie. I studied aerospace engineering. I graduated in 1969 as an aerospace engineer. Now, you can calculate my age with that, right? So 1969, Vietnam era. So I graduated from A&M, and I was employed by McDonnell Douglas as an aeronautical loads engineer on the F-4 Phantom jet, which is the plane that we were flying in Vietnam back then. And I was able to use almost everything that I learned at A&M in my first job, which is kind of unusual for engineers. A lot of times you don't use what you learned in school, but I was enamored with engineering very early on in my life. But this was a cyclical business, aerospace, and I didn't see a lot of future for me, so I jumped ship. And I became employed at Allied Chemical Corporation as a reliability engineer. Now, those of you who were here for Bob Latino's talk, Bob Latino's father, Charles Latino, is the guy who hired me. He hired me and a few other people from outside the chemical industry to make some changes because this was the dark ages. I mean, they were doing stuff that they'd been doing for 100 years. They weren't doing anything new. So we wanted to bring some new thinking. So we hired these people, and we go in there, and I'm telling you, this was an engineer's mecca because there was all kinds of things going wrong, and we could use engineering to fix that stuff. I'll show you a few pictures to give you a feel for this. There was, I don't know, there was 600, 700, 800 identical pieces of machinery lined up next to each other. Just imagine this. You walk into this area and 800 of the same machines buzzing around making nylon. And they all fail. I mean, not all the time, not all of a sudden, not all at once, but they fail. And if you could figure out why one of them failed and apply that fix to 800 other machines, I mean, you're a hero. I mean, very quickly on when we were hired, we'd attack these things and we'd get to the root of the problem. And you know, my first year, I made that company $2 million, and my salary was, I think, $20,000 back then at the time. And I used my engineering skills. I'm trying to make a point here. I was the engineers back then. I wasn't a people person. I mean, I liked people, but I didn't want to be around those people. I mean, I was an engineer, and they were a bunch of grunts. I was educated; they could hardly speak. I mean, their accent was Southern, and I'm from New York, so I did all my stuff without having to tangle with them, and I did really well. I mean, I made a name for myself. Then I got the assignment of the lifetime when I worked with Allied, and it was on a coke oven. You know, Bob Latino talked about the coke oven in his talk. It cost $100 million to build this coke oven in the 1980s. $100 million. And they turned it on, and 1 year later, it was gone. Well, it wasn't gone. It melted. It just oozed together. It became inoperable. And, of course, this was unacceptable. They had to do an analysis. The analysis was given to me, myself, and one other guy, Sam Harding. He was an electrical guy. I was a mechanical guy. We went in there, and we put strain gauges all over this coke oven and thermocouples all over the new coke oven, and we turned it on, and they called it the bionic coke oven. And we knew exactly what that thing was doing and the stresses and the forces. We bought that polariscope that Bob was talking about, and we studied the stresses. We figured it all out using engineering. Engineers were kings of the world. Everything that you look around right now, everything that you see, everything is there because an engineer did it. We are great, is the way I thought back then. So with this attitude and this feeling of competence, I formed my own company, Failsafe Network, in 1985. And shortly after that, we moved to Montebello, Virginia. This is a very remote area here. That's why there's a lag in what you're seeing. That's why my video isn't coming across too well, because we only have satellite internet up here. So I formed it in 1985, and my first assignment was with Morton Thiokol. Now, Morton Thiokol was the manufacturer of the solid rocket boosters for the space shuttle. And, you know, the first space shuttle flew in 1981. So this is 1985. And Morton Thiokol was having problems keeping up with the production demands that NASA had in place. In fact, this was the weak link. Morton Thiokol was the weak link. NASA needed more launches, and they couldn't because of Morton Thiokol. And the reason why Morton Thiokol couldn't keep up was they kept exploding their their production facilities. So they hired myself. I wasn't the leader now, but there was a leader and 3 other guys to go in there and figure out why did they, no, I'm going to use Bob Latino's wording. How did they keep exploding their production facilities? And we figured it out. Without having to talk to too many people and without having to do anything other than get into the engineering. Again, I'm the engineer's engineer in 1985. And then it happened. The incident that changed everything for me and for a lot of people. January the 28th, 1986, 11:38 a.m., the Challenger blows up. I'm out there. I'm doing work associated with that investigation. I have made presentations to these people that were involved in the launch decision. I knew some of them. And I'm telling you, my life totally changed. The way I saw things totally changed because of this incident. And I want to share a few quotes to kind of grab hold of what happened to me and what happens to a lot of people when things go wrong. Sooner or later, some event, like the Challenger, some person, some death, some idea, or some relationship will enter your life that you simply cannot deal with using your present understanding of things. Richard Rohr, Falling Upward. But my favorite quote here is from Khalil Gibran, from the book The Poet. Pain. And I was in pain back then. I was in emotional pain back then. I was the engineer's engineer, and I couldn't grasp what had happened using only that frame of mind. Pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. And all of a sudden, I realized, my goodness, there's much more to it than merely the physics or the engineering. Oh, engineering is vital. Everything you see, like I said, this glass of water right here. This glass of water would not be here if it weren't for engineers. But engineers are people. You can't just say engineering without realizing there's people behind the engineering. There's much more to it than merely the physics. And I also realized that there's much more to it than even systems. Now, not everybody agrees with me, even the board members on the HPRCT, even the people that are the panelists, Bob Latino and Joe Esty and maybe Dean, they probably don't even agree with me. But I'm telling you how I see it. There's much more to it than merely the physics of the systems. NASA had the best physics in the world, and look what happened. NASA had the best systems in the world, and look what happened. So there's also the who. There were individuals who tended to do certain things in spite of the excellent physics and the excellent systems. Now, this is me back then. My head is spinning, realizing something that I didn't want to realize, and that is that nothing goes wrong. Nothing goes wrong in a system created by humans without a human hand in it. I didn't want to know that, but I was forced to know that. Now here we go again. Get your smartphones out and go to polev.com. See Robert Nelms 464. Do you agree with this? polev.com. See Robert Nelms 464 is the username. Wow. Well, I must say that I am somewhat flabbergasted because I have given this talk before, and oh, here we go. All right, very good. Sometimes I've had, well, every time I've given this, I've had totally disagree show up, like 5 or 6%. So thank you. All right, now with that in mind, let me go to the next step. I think something is wrong with the way we currently learn from undesired events. Well, let me say that another way. I think something was wrong with the way I used to learn from undesired events. But I think that's still true everywhere. And what I think is wrong, fundamentally wrong, is that none of the known event learning methods focuses on the real root cause. Let that sink in for a minute. But then I want to hear what you think about this. What do you think I'm getting after here? What do you, well, forget me, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. What would you say is the real root cause of our problems? Go ahead and type something in there. Stubbornness. Bias. Systems questioning. Complacency. People. Systems. Which is going to win, systems or people? Systems is winning. People is winning. Okay, I got to be careful about time here. I'd like to sit here all day and see how this turns out. I fundamentally, respectfully disagree with people who say systems. In fact, that's one of the main messages of this talk. It's not systems. The real root cause of our problems is people. It's us. There's 8 billion root causes in the world. And I don't know how many of them, maybe there's 80 of them right here listening to this, including me. Now, the problem that I see with the current state of event learning is that it tries its best to infer that it's not people. Think of this. When in truth, people are at the root of everything that goes right and everything that goes wrong. So here, I'd like to go with this, is that no matter what event learning method you're currently using, whether it's Taproot or PROACT or SoLogic or KT or Phoenix or latent cause analysis or whatever, no matter what you're using, or learning teams, even learning teams, ask people to see themselves as part of their problems by asking the involved people 2 key questions. So here's these questions that I was talking about in the beginning. Here they are. Now, this is after you understand the how that Bob Latino talked about on day 1. On the first webinar. After you understand the how, after you gather all the evidence and you understand the whole thing, ask the involved people 2 key questions. And here's question number 1. What is it about the way we are that contributed to this problem, and what do we intend to do about it? And I know from experience that people love to answer this question. What is it about the way we are? And they go on and on and on and on and on. And there could be 20 or 30 things, depending on how many people you're asking. Let me give you an example of this so you can imagine where I'm going. Let's suppose you're in a family of 5. The husband, the wife, the mother-in-law, 2 children. And let's say it's Friday evening and you're eating dinner, and you have a tradition. And your tradition is that every Friday evening you have ice cream for dessert. So you're finished with the dinner, and your wife goes to the freezer, and she opens the door, and there's no ice cream. You're running out of ice cream. So the husband says, oh, gee, look, honey, I'll do the dishes. I'll clear the table. You go to Safeway. It's a mile away, a mile back. By the time you get back, everything will be ready, and we'll have our ice cream. So the wife goes. She gets in the car, and she drives to Safeway, and she gets her ice cream. And on the way back, there's one stoplight. By the way, this really happened. There's one stoplight. So she stops at the stoplight, and as she's pulls to a stop, the car starts to chug. Like it always does. And in fact, it stalls out. Now, she's the first one at the stoplight, and it's a long stoplight, so there's a whole pile of cars behind her that are piled up, waiting for the light to turn. So the light turns green, but just as the light turns green, the car stalls. So she's frantic, and she turns the key. It won't start. And she keeps turning it, and she keeps pushing down on the accelerator, and she floods it, and the people are starting to beep the horn, and she starts sweating, and of course the ice cream melts. Eventually people pass her, and they look at her like, what are you doing? Finally, a neighbor comes and helps her, pushes her to the side, gets her home. Of course, the ice cream is gone by then. And the family, when the wife comes home, is mortified at what happened. I mean, she's a mess. She looks like she's a mess. But the husband is aware of these two questions. So the husband says, let's learn from this. So first of all, they get into the how, like what Bob Latino talked about. How did this happen? Well, it stalled. And why did it stall? It was flooded. And they got into as much as they could as a family. They could get into the how. But then the husband asks his whole family, what is it about the way we are as a family that contributed to this problem? And what do we intend to do about it? And they start talking. And, well, one of the things that was said was, we tend to be too busy to take care of the small things. We tend not to listen to one another when we think they're wrong. We tend to ignore small problems until they get large. Now, these are self-admissions from the family. They're seeing themselves. But then the husband says, that was really good, family. Now look, translate this to work. Family can be a team. It can be 4 people. It could be 20 people. It just depends on what went wrong. So then the husband says, let's go to the more important question, and I'd like to ask every one of you family members to answer this. What is it about the way I am that contributed to this problem, and what do I intend to do about it? And the husband says, and I'll go first. And that is critically important. The more mature the leader has to go first. The director that I was talking about who became a VP, he always went first. And you break the ice, and the husband admits something, and the wife admits something, and the children admit something, and the mother-in-law, she's the one who admitted the most. No, I'm just kidding. Now, I got to admit that when you first hear this, when you're hearing what I'm suggesting, you might bristle up. And I think I know why you might bristle up, because answering that question is contrary to human nature. Human nature, and I know this is debatable and arguable, but human nature universally everywhere is to be a blamer. It's not me, it's you. I mean, that's our typical stance. If you don't like this message that I'm giving you, it isn't me, it's you. What are you, a moron? No, I'm just kidding, of course. And it's not us, it's them. Look at what's happening in our country today. You know, the bigger the problem, the more prevalent is the blame virus. It's not me, it's you, it's not us, it's them. But look at what we do. We, by nature, are blamers. We, as people, we refuse to think it's us. It's our equipment, we say. Or, like many of you, we think it's our systems. My goodness. So, to really make a difference in your life and the people around you, I'm almost pleading with you ban blame. Now, I bet you 99%, maybe even 100% of you on this call agree with this. Ban blame. But let's get into this a little bit. I'm saying when something goes wrong, no one is allowed to blame any other person or thing. If I was the CEO of your company, this is unfair of me to say because I've never been a CEO, but I think that if I was a CEO, the message that I would give my employees would be, if anything goes wrong in my company, there is to be no blame. The only time you'd have to worry about your job is if you're blaming. But again, let's slow down a little bit, because if we stop here, if all we say is no blame, then there will be no accountability, there will be no justice, and there will be no personal growth. So you can't just say no blame. Along with that has to come a requirement. You're not allowed to blame. You have to look at yourself. Everybody involved in the incident. Imagine if we did this in our society today. Look at yourself by asking the two questions. What is it about the way we are that contributed to this problem, and what do we intend to do about it? And then, much more importantly, what is it about the way I am that contributed to this incident, and what do I intend to do about it? No blame. Required introspection. They have to go together. Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm in la la land. I don't know. But I honestly think that this is a suggestion that could change just about everything. So now I'd like you to get your smartphones out again, or your laptops or whatever, and I wonder what you're thinking right now. What kinds of problems are you thinking about as you hear this? Type something in. We will sound like aliens. Isn't that something? Oh, wow. Look at this. Look at this. Career limiting? It's career limiting to look at yourself as part of your problems. Wow. What have we turned into? You're answering a different question than I was asking, but actually it's my fault. I didn't ask it right. But this is still very revealing. Thank you for this. I'm going to continue because of the time. The way I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, but things that go wrong are an opportunity to change people. There's no way I can change you or you can change me, but things that go wrong can. In fact, if something goes wrong and people haven't changed, then whatever went wrong was in vain. I mean, we don't really understand what things that go wrong are. They exist to change people. Do I sound like an alien for saying that? Maybe. So with that in mind, do any of your employees have this job description? That is, my job is to help change the way people are in response to the things that go wrong in their lives. If you don't have anybody with that job description, well, it ain't going to happen. And I know I hear it all the time. You can't change people, Bob. You can't change people. Well, what? You're not the same person as you were 30 minutes ago. I mean, physically even. Your cells are dying. New ones are being created. Things are going into your brain that weren't there before. You're going to think about this tonight or later on. Sure, you can change people, but in order to do it, in order to change the way people are, they have to see themselves as part of the problem. I know this is true. I'll prove it. As soon as you see that you're part of the problem, as soon as you really see it, you're going to start changing. But you got to really see it. And here's the proof. If I ask you to go into the bathroom and look in a mirror, please go into the bathroom and look in a mirror. And if you do that, and you see a big piece of snot hanging out of your nose, you're going to take that big piece of snot out of your nose because you saw yourself and you didn't like what you saw. See, you didn't like what you saw. As soon as you really see that you're part of the problem, you're going to start changing. And another thing, until we see ourselves as part of the problem, they're never going to change. Until you husbands see yourselves as part of your marital problems, your wives will never change. And of course, the opposite is also true. You know, this stuff that's going on in our country, my goodness, until we, whoever we is, see ourselves as part of the problem, they'll never change. And it's more up to the more responsible, mature person to take the lead. So I'm getting to a wrap-up now, and then we'll open it up to questions. No blame, required introspection. Some of the people who have experienced the 4-day class that I used to teach, by the way, I no longer teach it live. I've retired from that. But these are class quotes. This suggestion addresses personal accountability, and it does it head on. Another quote, this suggestion requires people to see themselves as part of the problem and does not allow anyone to blame any other person or thing. It seems to me that this is the ultimate in personal accountability. Now, to help make this work wherever you are, I'm going to suggest an accountability contract. And this contract, by the way, it can be used at home. It can be used in a team environment. You know, people who tell me, oh, we'll never be able to do this where I work. Give me a break. Do it in your own team. Start it there and see what happens. So a suggested accountability contract reads something like this. Nobody in my family will be allowed to blame any incident on other people and things. Instead, everybody will be required to see themselves as part of the causes of this problem. In return, if you do that, in return for this open and honest reflection, the management of this organization promises they will not punish anyone when incidents occur. Now, I want to be clear here. This is when incidents occur. Every organization needs rules, policies, and procedures in place to prevent incidents. That's why they're there. And if people aren't following those rules and procedures and policies, there needs to be a consequence. If you go out into the field and you see somebody not wearing a hard hat, Of course you ask, why aren't you wearing a hard hat? And if they say, duh, I forgot. What? Go over there, put your hard hat on, and come back, strike one. Day two, you go out there and the same guy's not wearing a hard hat. Why aren't you wearing a hard hat? Hey, I hadn't had enough time. Well, strike two, go home. Okay, go home for a day, strike two, we're going to dock your pay. If they do it the third time, you're out of here. I'm not saying there's never a consequence. The time for that kind of a consequence, however, is before the incident. If we have an incident, it's too late. So, my last few slides. Event learning, in my opinion, should not be just another thing to do where people say, oh, no, we got to do that, oh, gee, oh, man. Or not just another effort to generate more action items. One of my favorite quotes of all time is coming up. This is a class quote. The guy said this: if you think writing action items will solve your problems, you don't understand the causes of your problems. Because the causes of our problems are us. It's the way we are. And you can't write an action item to change the way a person is. So event learning shouldn't be those things. Instead, it should be an attempt to change the way we are. Two more polls, and then we open it up to questions. What is the most significant thing you have heard in this presentation, please? I wanted to let that roll for a while. Want to whoops. Nuts. I'm sorry. I guess I'm going to go to the last slide. What concerns you the most about what you've heard in this presentation? What concerns you the most? I hope you're taking the time to read some of these. I'm going to, you can keep inputting to this. In fact, please do. And then afterwards, we'll have a record of all of them. But I'm going to go to the last slide right now. And I'm going to put my email address up there in case you want to be in touch with me later. And then I want to go to Bob, I think, Latino, because we have 10 minutes for any questions.
All righty. Excellent presentation, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our first question is, has HPRCT brought in appreciative inquiry techniques more effective in addressing human performance issues than the deficit-based causal analysis approach we use in nuclear?
Bob, I gave you specific instructions ahead of time not to ask me a question that I didn't understand. So that answers that one. No, read that phrase, appreciative inquiry techniques.
Techniques, yes.
Do you know who asked that?
Paul Gubanic.
Can we get him on the mic real quick, or do you know how to do that? Or if you
Yeah,
don't, we're going to keep going. Okay.
Let me see if I can find. Actually, I don't see his name.
Appreciative inquiry techniques. I don't know what that is, so I can't answer that question.
Unfortunately, Bob, I don't see his name in the listing, so I can't allow to talk.
I understand. Oh, here, wait a minute. I see Paul Gubanek.
This is Dean. I've just unmuted Paul. So Paul, if you're there and you can help us out, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So appreciative inquiry is a technique that was developed at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the 60s, 70s time frame. It is, in my opinion, much more amenable to human performance than our typical causal analysis techniques, which are deficit-based approaches. My car doesn't care if I talk bad about it. So deficit-based approaches work well for inanimate objects. Humans do not perform that way. And appreciative inquiry is much more focused on what we do well and building on strengths rather than focusing on the negative and what we do poorly.
And
Paul,
Bob, I want to add to that there's a comment from Teresa Swinton that says it's pre-accident investigation.
Oh, okay. Now I would have understood that one. But Paul, I don't want to let you go too quickly here. We got to let other people ask some questions. But Paul, that might be a really good webinar for you to volunteer to give. I'm certainly going to research this myself, and I'm sure other people are writing also. I will look it up. I will learn more about this, and if you feel like it, volunteer. Okay, Paul?
Understood.
Thank you. How about another question, Bob?
Bob, you're going to defer people from asking questions if you give them a task to do as a result of it. Okay, Bob? Just kidding.
That's a really good point.
Today we have another question from John Sherbin. I'm curious about your view on disciplinary action for non-conformance before an incident happens. What is your view if an incident is a near miss with no actual harm done, so at least one barrier system worked while others may have been compromised in some way?
A near miss, as far as I'm concerned, is the same as an incident. So there should be no discipline, and it should be handled the way I'm suggesting. Everybody should look at themselves as part of the problem. And what is it about the way I am that contributed to this, and what am I going to do about it? No discipline. The only time, in my opinion, for discipline is where there is no consequence at all, and there wasn't even a near miss. Like my example, somebody wasn't wearing a hard hat. Another example, somebody runs a traffic light. No incident. Nobody was going the other way, no near miss. But a cop sees it. Give the person a ticket. There's got to be a consequence. You don't wait for there to be a consequence or even a near miss to impose the discipline. Now, that's just my opinion. I know there's a million other ones out there, but you asked for my opinion. Thank you. Got another question, Bob?
That's all I have on deck, Bob.
Wow, okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you all very much for attending, and we will let you all know when the next webinar week is and who will be on it. So thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Bob, for your time as well.